The clinking of crystal glasses and polite laughter echoed through the dining room, but I was focused on the tight, annoyed expression on my daughter's face. My name is Elaine Porter, and I am 68 years old. I have lived a practical life prioritizing my family after my husband passed away 15 years ago. Tonight, my daughter Sarah was hosting a dinner party at her downtown apartment, an apartment I helped secure and heavily subsidized every single month. I was in the kitchen quietly arranging the dessert tray when Sarah walked in with her husband Mark. She didn't see me standing in the pantry alcove. "Why is she still here?" Mark muttered, fixing his expensive tie. "She is throwing off the vibe with her sensible cardigan and quiet staring." "Your friends are asking who the caterer is." Sarah let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms. "Look, I only invited her out of pity. She paid for the catering, so I had to let her come. Just ignore her." I told her to stay out of the way. "Once the main course is done, I will hint that it is past her bedtime." The words hung in the air thick and suffocating. I didn't drop the tray. I didn't gasp or confront them in a tearful rage. I simply set the silver tray down on the marble counter, untied the apron I had brought from home, and folded it neatly. I walked out of the pantry. Sarah jumped, her eyes widening as a flush of red crept up her neck. "Mom, I offered a small, polite smile. "Don't worry, Sarah. I won't get in your way." Without waiting for her to stammer out a lie, I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet. I walked out the door, the heavy oak clicking shut behind me. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of relief. The heavy fog of obligation was finally lifting. The drive back to my house in the suburbs was remarkably peaceful. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires against the pavement. For years, I had convinced myself that Sarah's sharp tongue and dismissive attitude were just symptoms of stress. She was a busy professional, I reasoned. She needed my help to get ahead. But tonight, the illusion shattered. I wasn't a mother to her. I was an ATM with a pulse, a pitiable inconvenience that occasionally funded her luxury lifestyle. I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor lights illuminating the modest 3-bedroom home I had owned for 30 years. It was fully paid off, a sanctuary I had carefully maintained. I walked inside, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at the kitchen table. I pulled out my laptop and opened my spreadsheet. I am a retired bookkeeper, and numbers never lie. Over the past 3 years, I had transferred $3,000 on the first of every month to cover the bulk of Sarah and Mark's apartment lease. I had also opened a joint checking account, handing her a debit card for absolute emergencies. I clicked into the banking portal. The emergency account showed recent transactions at a high-end spa, a luxury boutique, and a trendy brunch spot. They were living large on the funds I had painstakingly saved. There would be no dramatic arguments, no shouting matches where she could play the victim. I was simply going to remove the foundation I had built for her and let gravity do the rest. I navigated to the recurring transfers page. My finger hovered over the mousepad for only a fraction of a second before I clicked. Transfer canceled. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Tomorrow the bank opened at 9 and the real work would begin. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, reflecting a woman who was finally awake. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in a decade. I didn't linger in bed. I had an appointment to keep with my own financial independence. By 9:15 a.m., I was sitting across from a teller at my local bank branch. I handed over my ID and smiled warmly. "Good morning. I need to make some changes to my accounts today." First, I addressed the joint checking account. Since I was the primary account holder, I had full authority to close it. The teller printed out a cashier's check for the remaining balance, a meager $200 left from the $5,000 I had deposited just last month. I slid the check into my purse. Next, I instructed. I need to permanently block the secondary debit card attached to my main checking account, the one in my daughter's name. The teller typed rapidly, the clicking of the keyboard sounding like a metronome, keeping time with my new reality. Done, Mrs. Porter. The card is now deactivated. The card is now. I walked out of the bank feeling a profound sense of clarity. The financial pipeline was officially severed. Sarah and Mark had grown accustomed to a life they couldn't afford on their own salaries. They leased European cars, dined at upscale restaurants, and hosted lavish parties, all while I quietly patched the holes in their sinking ship. I spent the rest of the afternoon tending to my garden, pulling out weeds that had overgrown around my roses. It was therapeutic work. I was uprooting the toxic elements from my life one by one. My phone remained completely silent for the next few days. Sarah didn't call to apologize for the dinner party. She didn't call to check on me. She was perfectly content to ignore my existence until she needed something. Little did she know the first of the month was approaching rapidly. On Thursday, my older son David stopped by for his usual weekly visit. Unlike his sister, David had inherited his father's steady, grounded nature. He worked as a high school science teacher, lived in a modest duplex, and never asked me for a dime. He walked into the kitchen, dropping a bag of fresh coffee beans on the counter. "Hey, Mom, you look different today. Relaxed." I poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the island toward him. "I am relaxed, David. I made some changes this week." I told him about the dinner party. I didn't exaggerate or cry. I simply repeated the words Sarah had used. Then I told him about the bank. David gripped his coffee mug, his jaw tightening. "She actually said that she invited you out of pity." He shook his head, a look of disgust crossing his face. "I always knew she was taking advantage of you, Mom, but I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. You did the right thing, cutting her off." "I am not doing it to punish her," I clarified, looking him in the eye. "I am doing it to protect myself. I refuse to finance my own disrespect." David reached over and squeezed my hand. "Good for you. But you know she is going to flip out when she realizes the money is gone. Right, Mark's income barely covers their car payments." "That is no longer my problem," I replied smoothly. "They are adults. They will have to figure it out." Before he left, David offered to stay with me on the first of the month, anticipating the storm. I declined. I didn't need a bodyguard. I had my boundaries, and they were stronger than any deadbolt. 2 days later, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from Sarah. The dominoes had finally started to fall. I picked up my phone and read the message flashing on the screen. "Mom, I am at the salon." And the emergency card just declined. "Did you freeze it by accident? Unblock it ASAP. I am standing at the register, and it is embarrassing." I read the words twice. No greeting, no asking how I was, just an immediate demand to fix her inconvenience. I set the phone back down on the table and picked up my knitting needles. I did not reply. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. This time, I answered, my voice perfectly neutral. "Hello, Sarah." "Mom, finally." She snapped the background noise, indicating she was out on the street. "Did you not see my text?" "The card declined. Call the bank and fix it. I had to use Mark's credit card and it nearly maxed it out." "I didn't freeze it by accident," I answered calmly. "I closed the account and deactivated your card." Silence stretched across the line. "What? Why would you do that without telling me?" "Because it was my account and my money," I reminded her. "And since I am just a pity invite who gets in your way, I decided you no longer need my financial interference. I wouldn't want my money to throw off your vibe." She gasped, suddenly realizing that I had heard every word at the dinner party. Mom, you took that out of context. Mark was just stressed about the catering, and I don't need an explanation, Sarah. I interrupted, keeping my tone entirely conversational. The decision is made. The emergency fund is closed. You can't just cut me off with no warning, she yelled. I just did, I replied. Have a good afternoon. I tapped the red button ending the call. The silence in my living room was beautiful. I took a deep breath, savoring the tranquility, knowing the real test was still a few days away. The first of the month arrived with a crisp, clear morning. I spent the day volunteering at the local community center, purposely keeping my mind occupied. I knew exactly what was happening downtown. Sarah and Mark's luxury apartment complex used an automated online portal for rent collection. For 3 years, my bank had automatically wired $3,000 to that portal to cover the bulk of their lease. Mark's account was set up to cover the remaining fraction. At 4 p.m., my phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I checked the screen. 5 missed calls from Sarah, 3 from Mark. I stepped out into the hallway of the community center and answered the 6th call. Mom, what is going on? Sarah's voice was shrill, bordering on panic. The property manager just emailed us. They said our rent payment bounced. Where is the transfer? There is no transfer, I stated, leaning against the brick wall. I canceled the auto pay last week. Are you insane? Mark's voice boomed through the speaker. She had put me on speakerphone. Elaine, you can't just stop paying the rent. We don't have the liquidity to cover the full amount right now. Mark. I addressed him directly, my voice unwavering. You are 32 years old. You live in a penthouse apartment. If you do not have the liquidity to pay your own rent, you should not be living there. You promised to help us, Sarah cried out. I offered help when you were starting out, I corrected. It was never meant to be a permanent subsidy for a lifestyle you cannot afford, especially not for people who find my presence a burden. We have 3 days to pay or they apply a massive late fee, she shrieked. Then I suggest you review your budget, I advised. Goodbye. I hung up, slipped the phone back into my purse, and walked calmly back into the center. That evening, I was sitting on my back porch reading a novel when a car sped into my driveway, tires crunching aggressively against the gravel. It was Mark's leased BMW. Both he and Sarah stormed out, slamming the car doors. I didn't retreat inside. I stayed seated, marking my page with a tassel, and watched them march up the wooden steps. Open the screen door, Mom, Sarah demanded, rattling the handle. I had locked it from the inside. We can talk right here, I replied, my voice steady. But keep your voices down. I won't have you disturbing my neighbors. Mark ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely frantic. Elaine, please. We are sorry about the dinner party, okay? It was a stupid joke. We respect you. But you have to turn the transfer back on. We literally don't have $3,000 in our checking account. I looked at him, taking in his designer watch and expensive shoes. You have a closet full of designer clothes, Mark. Sarah goes to the spa twice a month. You have the money. It is simply tied up in your vanity. How can you be so cold? Sarah demanded, tears streaming down her face. You're our mother. You're supposed to support us. Support is not servitude, I answered flatly. I raised you. I paid for your college. I helped you get on your feet. But I will not be used as a bank account by people who mock me behind my back. If you don't pay this, we'll have to break the lease, Mark threatened, trying to regain the upper hand. We'll have to move into a cheap place. That sounds like a practical financial decision, I agreed calmly. You should probably start packing. Now please leave my property before I go inside and ignore you entirely. They stared at me, realizing their usual manipulation tactics were hitting a brick wall. I didn't blink. Eventually, they turned around, marching back to their car in defeated silence. 2 weeks passed. I maintained my absolute boundary, blocking Mark's number and putting Sarah on a silent notification setting. I checked her messages once a day just to stay informed but never replied. The tone of her texts shifted from angry demands to desperate bargaining and finally to panicked updates. They had tried to float the rent on a credit card, but the transaction was flagged and blocked due to their high debt-to-income ratio. Then the real blow fell. Sarah left a voice memo on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was hollow, stripped of all its previous arrogance. "Mom, the bank called today. They reviewed our auto loan for the BMW. Because we missed the rent payment, the apartment complex reported us to the credit bureau. The bank saw our credit score tank and our debt load, and they are threatening to recall the car loan if we don't provide proof of increased income." I listened to the recording while watering my ferns. The domino effect was working faster than I had anticipated. By removing my artificial financial support, the reality of their spending habits was catching up to them at breakneck speed. She sniffled on the recording. "We are breaking the lease. We have to pay a huge penalty, and we are moving into a tiny 2-bedroom in the industrial district. We are completely broke, Mom. I hope you are happy." I deleted the message. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't devastated either. I felt a profound sense of rightness. I was no longer enabling their delusion. I was forcing them to live in the real world, a place where actions had consequences, and money didn't magically appear on the first of the month. Let's see how that plays out. I thought, placing my phone on the charger. The extended family group chat, which included my sister's nieces and nephews, lit up that evening with a long, dramatic paragraph from Sarah. She painted a picture of absolute victimhood, claiming I had gone crazy and suddenly cut them off without warning, leaving them homeless and destitute. Before I could even formulate a response, David stepped in. My son had always been quiet, but when he spoke, people listened. "David, that is not the whole story, Sarah. You told Mom to her face that you only invited her around out of pity and didn't want her in your way. You used her for rent and emergency cash while living a lifestyle you couldn't afford. She finally stopped being your ATM. Stop lying to the family." The group chat went dead silent, the digital equivalent of a stunned gasp. My sisters, who knew me to be a generous and level-headed woman, immediately understood the situation. A few minutes later, my younger sister texted me privately. "Good for you, Elaine. It is about time they grew up." I opened the main group chat and typed a single, simple message. "Elaine, David is correct. I have chosen to step back financially. I wish Sarah and Mark the best as they learn to manage their own household. I won't be discussing this further." I muted the chat. I didn't need to argue or defend myself. The truth stood on its own, sturdy and unshakable. Sarah's attempt to paint me as the villain had backfired entirely, leaving her isolated in her own mess. She had tried to leverage the family's sympathy, but my boundaries held firm. For the first time in years, I didn't spend the evening worrying about Sarah's bills or Mark's career. I cooked a nice piece of salmon, poured a crisp glass of white wine, and enjoyed my dinner in complete, uninterrupted peace. The house felt entirely my own. Again, free from the invisible strings of their financial demands. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, bringing a crisp autumn breeze through the neighborhood. My life settled into a beautiful, quiet routine. I joined a morning walking group, read novels on my porch, and spent my disposable income on myself. I took a week-long trip to Sedona with my sister, paying for it with the money I used to throw into Sarah's endless pit of expenses. Sarah and Mark had moved into a small, older apartment complex near the highway. They sold the BMW and bought a used sedan. From what David told me, they were working extra hours just to stay afloat. The glamour was gone, replaced by the harsh, necessary grind of reality. One afternoon, there was a tentative knock on my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was Sarah. She looked tired. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, just jeans and a plain sweater. I opened the door, leaving the screen locked between us. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice quiet. "Can we talk?" We can, I replied gently. But I need you to know upfront my finances are completely off the table. I will never pay another one of your bills. If you are here for a loan, the answer is no. She looked down at her shoes and nodded slowly. I know. I am not here for money. I just wanted to say I am sorry. For the dinner party. For everything. It has been really hard lately, and I realize now how much you did for us. I looked at her, seeing a hint of the daughter I used to know beneath the humbled exterior. I accept your apology, Sarah. But trust takes time to rebuild. I know, she whispered. I didn't unlock the screen door that day. Boundaries remain boundaries. But I smiled a genuine smile and told her I would call her next week. I finally had my life back, and I wasn't giving it up for anyone.